morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, or whatever time zone you're listening to this in. You are tuning into In Her Blazer podcast. So welcome, everyone, especially those of you who are new to the show. Super excited to have you on this episode of Am I Racist or Just Hate Myself? And yes, that is very loaded, and I'm going to dive into that. So I'm super excited to jump into this very sensitive, juicy, full-packed, scary subject with all of you. So for those of you who are tuning in for the very first time, my name is Jeboah Miranda, and I am the host of In Her Blazer podcast. I also run Jeboah Miranda Foundation, which is a foundation that helps women who've been affected by suicide to get a university education. And also we provide mental toughness training programs for female youth to help them come up in life and succeed. And I also am a keynote speaker on mental toughness, company culture, and corporate branding. So thank you, everybody, and let's have some fun. So on this episode, I felt very compelled to speak with all of you about the topic of racism, bias, discrimination, colorism, and so on and so forth. Not because of this movement, but because I finally feel like I am in a place in my life where I am ready to talk about that in my own experiences. And I think I've only been pushed more so to do so because of this movement we are all experiencing. So I wanted to talk to you about this because many people actually don't realize that I am a mixed race woman myself, and I've experienced racism my entire life. Racism from all types of people, from all different backgrounds and different genders, because depending on who you ask that week, some people think I'm 100% Caucasian, and different ethnic groups will shame the color of my skin. And I've experienced a lot of that, and that recently. And then other groups will think I am mixed race and have an opinion about that. So I am half Canadian, half Caucasian on my dad's side. I am also East Indian and Indigenous. I am Métis and from Blackfoot and Cree tribes. So that is what makes up me. But beyond that, I'm a human being. I am a female, and I have a lot of personal values and beliefs. And I don't believe the color of my skin or my background makes me who I am. I'm very proud of my background, and I'm very proud of having been exposed to so many cultures because of my beautiful family. And in my family, I grew up, of course, with those who were purely Canadian. I grew up with the East Indian side. I grew up being a part of Indigenous culture. I have Black aunts and uncles who are of African descent. And I grew up in a family where some people were practicing Christians, some people were atheists, and some people were Muslim. So I grew up in a very, very inclusive household, and am incredibly grateful for that because I love cultures. And I think everyone has very, very beautiful elements to their culture. And why not learn about someone else's culture and experience different things and find out why they like the things they like, or try their foods, or understand their history. It's fun and it's beautiful and it's exciting, and differences are incredible. And I've always felt that way. So I wanted to talk about this with you because I've experienced racism my entire life. And I truly believe we all have some sort of privilege. Privilege is beyond just race. Privilege could be coming from a loving two-parent household or a loving household in general. Privilege could have access to money or access to education, or it could be conventional privilege. So based on societal standards, you fall into a certain category and get privileges based on those things. So it's a very broad term, and I think I personally prefer to critically analyze something and come to a conclusion on my own based on research versus emotion. That's just how I tend to live my life because things aren't black and white. We live in a world of gray. So growing up, I experienced a lot of racism, and I experienced racism because my skin was darker when I was younger. And growing up Indigenous in Canada, unfortunately is still very much in a place where people feel like it's acceptable to be openly racist towards Indigenous people. And that will change, but I don't think we're at that pivotal point yet where people are starting to realize that's not okay to say racist things to Indigenous people. So I grew up experiencing racism, And the ironic thing about that was the people that I experienced the most racism from were my own friends. And growing up, I didn't realize it was racism. I just knew it made me feel bad. And I had to explore that many, many years later. When I was growing up, my own best friends, my group of friends, they were primarily Caucasian females. I grew up in BC, and in the part of BC that I grew up in Victoria, it was primarily people that were in my school anyways, Caucasians and South Asians and East Asians. So we didn't have that much diversity. And even in the different groups we had, there weren't that many kids in our school from those different backgrounds. So when I was growing up with my own friends, in our schools in BC, they do make more of an emphasis to create a safe space for Indigenous kids to feel like they still have some sort of their culture to be a part of. And in doing so, I felt extremely ostracized because of what the other kids would say about me. So in my own school, when I was growing up, I used to have teachers come to me during class once a month and pull me out to attend these group sessions to learn more about Indigenous culture with other Indigenous kids. And sometimes they would have a pizza lunch or have a movie day that we would watch a movie together. And every time I was pulled out of class, my friends would have something to say about it. And they would make fun of me for it. And I didn't understand it back then, because who understands this when you're a child? But they would make fun of me for it. And I hated it. I started to feel incredibly ashamed. And it only got worse over time because it went on for the entirety of my education. So from elementary school until high school. And every time I'd be pulled out of the classroom by one of our Indigenous faculty members, my friends would be like, "Oh, is that your dad?" Or, "Oh, is this the time that you get to be pulled out of class and have access to some sort of privileged group?" And I didn't understand it because I was very confused by the fact that anyone who took the time to understand the history of Indigenous culture with residential schools and rape and abuse and all of that, I didn't understand how they could look at the history of what Indigenous people have gone through and then still think they were being offered privileges that other groups weren't being offered. I didn't get that, especially because at the time in our own school, I remember very vividly that one of the teachers during one of our meetings has said to me, the dropout rate for Indigenous students in our school is over 50%. So over 50% of Indigenous kids in our high school, when I got to the high school level, do not even graduate high school. And that was shocking, beyond shocking to me, and very, very sad. So as I went through my elementary and my middle school, my friends continued to make fun of me every time I was pulled out of the classroom to go. I would start to resent it, and I would start to try and get out of it. And I would start to hate it, and I started to hate the culture. I started to hate the culture because my friends were shaming me for this experience to be more tied to my own culture. And because of them shaming me regularly for years, I started to hate that culture instead of growing up and appreciating it. So what I was really doing is I was starting to hate myself because I didn't like the way I was made to feel for years on end about being a part of this beautiful culture. And when I got to the high school level, I realized at that point what they were saying was wrong, and I used to push back on it. But the shame that I had developed was so deep that I had to work on that very, very hard after high school, in my university career and beyond that, to overcome it and start to love myself, because it was a part of who I am, and it is a part of who I am. And I want to love it because it's me. And in high school, I would be pulled out once a month for this peach lunch get together with the other Indigenous kids. And there weren't many in my school at all. And when I was pulled out, my friends would be like, "Oh, that is so unfair. This is so unfair. Like, why do you guys get free pizza? We don't get anything. It didn't happen to you." And I started to push back on that because it was incredibly ignorant, especially in BC, because we grew up learning about the history of Indigenous people and what they had gone through. So to know the history and still say remarks like that, I was appalled. And it made me hate that part of myself for many, many years. So as I went into university, I worked my ass off. I had a job, obviously, while I was going through school, putting myself through school, where I'd work up to 30 hours a week with a full course load in university, and then do volunteer work and a million other things. And then when my friends saw me get really good jobs, secure really good jobs, like at the Canada Revenue Agency or Royal Bank of Canada or whatever, they used to say to me, oh, it's only because you're Aboriginal. And that used to piss me off, because no, it's because I worked my ass off to get there and I nailed the interview. But they would diminish all of my hard work, all of my history, all of my suffering, even though they knew I had gone through 2 of my brothers committing suicide when I was 16 and 17. And to survive that and put myself through school and then get this job, they had erased all of that with that ignorant comment. So then when I finished university and I was applying for jobs, I stopped ticking the check box that said, you were from this background. And I used to check that box because those boxes, although they don't say much about you, I was part of those groups. I am Indigenous, I am East Indian, I am Caucasian, I am many different things. And I stopped checking the box because I didn't want to feel like I didn't earn my job. And I felt like I didn't earn it sometimes because of my best friends making these comments to me saying that I didn't earn it. And it wasn't right. And I accepted it and I shamed myself for it and hated telling people what my background was every time they would ask me. And I had to really go through a transformation over the years to love that part of myself and love myself and start to see the beautiful aspects of the Indigenous culture. Because in Canada, the racism is so deep here within the Indigenous community that if you are Indigenous, and especially if you are a mixed Indigenous person, you had to try incredibly hard to see the beautiful aspects. Because for years on end, my experience with it has been listening to people around me talk about, oh, they're a bunch of alcoholics, they have no education, they have too many children, they're on welfare, all of these horrible things rooted in stereotypes. And nobody ever pointed out the beautiful aspects of the culture when I was growing up. No one from my social circle. It was other people, older people, pointed out the beautiful art and the beautiful values and the beautiful songs and dance and all of these things. But I was too ashamed because the shame had been rooted so deeply in me from the racism and discrimination I had faced from my own best friends for years on end that I couldn't see it. And it was only until when I became older and started to see song and dance and go to these events where I would see the culture being displayed in front of me that I started to let that go. And I started to look at it objectively. And I started to get emotional and fall in love with it for the first time. That piece of me. Because I had never been able to do that because of the discrimination I faced my entire life. And when I was younger, because my skin was darker and my mother looks very ethnic because she is, and her skin is brown, when I would go to stores, I remember this, and I didn't understand what racism was even when it was happening to me. I just knew it was wrong. I remember us going to the CD store back in the day when people actually had CDs. And we were in there because I loved CDs. I loved music. I grew up singing and playing instruments and being in musical theater and stuff like that. So I loved music. And because I always begged my mom to take me so that I could buy CDs and just, I loved it. I wanted to spend all my money on CDs. And when we were leaving the H&M store, the security guard stopped me. And I was confused why he stopped me because I didn't think I looked like a thief. I was probably 8 years old. And my jacket was kind of puffy, but I was 8 years old. And I think my mother even had a bag in her hand of CDs that we had purchased. And he started to check my pockets. And I was like, what are you doing? And my mom told me to be quiet and just comply with this Caucasian security guard while he checks me down as an 8-year-old to see if I didn't steal anything. And I realized this was racism because of the way my mother was looking at him and telling me to be quiet and just go with it. And that was one of the first moments I realized he was being racist to me because my skin was brown. And then as I grew older and entered into many biracial couple situations, so I've dated a lot of Black men and men of different backgrounds, I started to watch racism happen regularly in front of my face and was always horrified by it. I was horrified because I've seen it to my own family members, because I have Black family members, Muslim family members, everything you could think of. And I've always been horrified because it hurt me deeply. And I remember this one time, I was in my first year of university with a boyfriend who is Black, and he's from Ghana, and I love Ghanaian men. And he was the greatest guy. He was super nice, super funny, very, very smart, very handsome. And we went to a grocery store to get something near our campus. And when he was paying, he paid with his credit card, and he took out his credit card, and the Caucasian cashier asked him for a piece of ID. And it took me a second to realize what the heck was going on, but once I realized, I was like, why are you asking for his ID? And she was like, oh, I just have to. And I'm like, no, you don't. I've come into the store many times using my own credit card, and none of you have ever asked me for ID, ever. But you chose to ask him, the nicest guy, the most trustworthy guy. You chose to ask him because he's Black. And I remember this because we talked about it when I left the store, and I was very sad because this was a person I loved. And now I just have to watch people treat him with racism. And then I continued to watch this over the years. And with my family members, my sister's husband's Muslim. And when his family would go through airport security, they would get pulled off and searched down. And my sister's husband's family does very well for themselves. And even though they did very well for themselves, no matter what, every time they would go through airport security, they would get pulled out of line, brought to a separate area, and searched down. And my sister told me at one point, her mother-in-law begged my sister's husband's sister to please stop wearing her hijab because they hated it. They hated the racism. They hated having to be pulled out and searched and questioned and interrogated. And she refused because this is a part of who she is. And she loves her faith, and that's something very important to her. And no matter what kind of discrimination she was going to continue to face, she wasn't going to change who she was. And I've just continued to see this over and over again. And then more recently, and my friend groups have always been mixed, not because I seek that out, but because I think we attract what we love, or we attract things that are familiar to ourselves. And my life that I grew up in was very mixed. So I attract something that's very familiar, very homely to me. So recently, I was planning a diversity and inclusion event for my nonprofit. And I wanted to bring together senior leaders from different backgrounds. And I always bring senior leaders from different backgrounds together because they have different perspectives. I do not want a bunch of HR people at any event of mine talking from an HR perspective. I want you as a senior leader to have formulated your own opinion from working in your industry for over 20 years. Everyone has an opinion. So I think we get the best result when we bring people from different backgrounds together and have an honest, real, raw conversation. So I was planning this event for my nonprofit, which went very, very well. And I could not be more grateful to my team of volunteers that really brought it to fruition. They're incredible, all of them. But as I started to promote this event that was centered around diversity and inclusion, where 100% of the ticket sale proceeds are going to the foundation to help women who've been affected by suicide to get a university education, I started to face racist remarks on social media. And I started to experience a lot of colorism, where people shame you based on the shade of your skin, the skin color. And I was shocked because I wasn't anticipating that. I started to experience a lot of horrible comments from people who assumed, without doing any research on me or having any type of conversation, that I was Caucasian. And they were shaming me for the color of my skin, which I was appalled by. Because I think everyone has an opinion and everyone can help work together to solve issues. And I believe so strongly in allyship. With my nonprofit that focuses on helping women, I believe in order to help women, we have to work together with men. No group is better than the other. And I believe so strongly in allyship. And it was very shocking to me that as I was promoting my event, to have this conversation, this honest, true conversation around diversity and inclusion with senior leaders, which very rarely happens, where they take away the corporate jargon. I started to have women say, oh, you're promoting some white-led event, like you should learn what real diversity and inclusion means. You can't just use a buzzword, and going off on me. And I'm like, actually, I am Indigenous and I'm mixed race, and I do have an opinion. I actually know quite a lot about diversity and inclusion. I have a very diverse family, and I've watched racism my entire life. This isn't new. And they just started to shame me for it. So I had to push back a lot because it was ignorant. And I started to face racist remarks, and it was ignorant. And at one point in particular, this comment made me very sad because it had nothing to do with me, but it showed me the world we're living in. And I was very sad by that. This one girl on social media, one of the volunteers had promoted the event on his page. He's a fantastic guy too. Awesome guy. Videographer, super cool. And he promoted the event on the page and had mentioned, I'm Indigenous. And the one girl who responded, who left a comment on his page, said, oh, it's interesting to see not one single person is a visible person of color. And that made me very sad because I had a senior leader on our panel who is of South Asian descent. And what you were saying is the color of her skin was not dark enough to be included in that group. So what she was saying is her whole history, her whole life, and all of her experiences with racism didn't matter because she wasn't dark enough to be on a panel and share her perspectives. Even though she's brilliant and vulnerable and raw and an incredibly impressive, amazing woman, she was now being robbed of all of her experiences because the color of her skin wasn't dark enough for that person to want to attend the event. And I had this conversation with one of my really good Pakistani best friends about it because I was like, are we really at that point? Are we really at that point where we're now shaming other cultures? Because the point of the movement to me is to help bring a sense of equality, to help bring social injustice, systemic issues to the surface, racism that's been deeply ingrained in our culture to the surface, to help people, to help the Black community finally get a leg up, and to help the Indigenous community finally get a leg up. And now we're going against each other's culture, which we're going to fail. When you start pitting one culture against the other, you're going to fail. Because as soon as you say one culture is better than the other, you have lost all sight into what the point of this movement is about. You have forgotten why we're doing this in the first place. You have forgotten everything that matters and have become incredibly short-sighted, and that makes me sad for you. Because this movement is bigger than ourselves, and we need allyship. We need to work together to bring these issues, these systemic issues, to the surface, put a spotlight on it, and start to make corporations and our society and government change their practices, change the language being used, change their assessments in hiring and recruiting and all of that. And we have to work with each other in a non-hostile format to really bring about change. But we're not going to do that if we hate each other's culture along the way, if we try to tear someone else's culture or experiences down. When we all do that, we all lose. What the world needs, and I truly believe this every single day of my life, what the world needs is love. The world is desperate for love. We have enough hate. We have enough anger. We have enough hostility. We need love. We need to show each other love, compassion, and acceptance, and withhold our judgment to learn from each other. We have enough hate. We need love. And we need to try and seek to understand each other's perspectives, whether that be on race, sexuality, religion, mental capacity, mental health, all of these different variables, gender. We need to seek to understand and withhold our judgment. Because we all have pain, we all have heartbreak, we all have stuff that has hurt us deeply over the years that we have either worked our ass off to overcome and heal, or we're in the process of. And we need to help each other move forward, get a leg up, and succeed in the end. And we can only do that through allyship and working together and showing each other love and compassion. So I wanted to share this with you because I so desperately want equality in all facets. I so desperately want to see that. I want to see people be given a shot. And I want to see people being accepted. I want to see people be themselves, because your flaws are gorgeous. Your flaws are absolutely gorgeous. And the differences in our culture and our experience and our sexuality, what have you, are beautiful. There's nothing wrong with being you. There is nothing wrong with that. And I'm hoping by sharing a little bit of my story and what I've experienced my whole life and what I've been experiencing more recently, that you might be more encouraged to do some research or to have an honest conversation with somebody in your life without judgment, to learn, just to learn. Because the first step in all of this, in creating true change, is we have to educate ourselves on what the root issues are. We have to educate ourselves on where we currently are in society, in government, in our corporations, and wherever it is. And then we have to try and figure out where we want to get to and what the gap is, and then start to create a plan of how we're going to really create change. Really create change. And we deserve this. You deserve this. You deserve to have the life you want to have. You deserve to be you and to be loved for who you are. And I hope you know that, and I hope you start to believe that, because I'm proud to be Indigenous. And that's the first time in my life I've ever, one of the few times in my life that I've said that. And it always brings tears to my eyes, because it was a lifelong journey for me to get there, to chip away at the shame that I had built in myself around that. And I hope you, if you're struggling with your background, if you're struggling with who you are and feeling like you hate a part of who you are, I hope you decide to love it. I hope you decide to love yourself, truly unconditionally love yourself and accept yourself, because you're beautiful and you're worth it and you're good enough. You're perfect the way you are. And our flaws are great. Nobody needs to actually be perfect, because perfect doesn't exist. It's bullshit. Perfectionism is bullshit. So I hope you seek to educate yourself on maybe another culture, or maybe the movement, or just be open-minded. Be open-minded when you meet people that are different from you. Be open-minded to seeing the beautiful parts of whatever that thing is that they're talking about, and choosing to be vulnerable and share with you. Because just because something is different from you doesn't make it wrong. And I hope you start to see that. And I'm grateful for this movement, and I'm grateful for the attention it's bringing, because of this movement, I've been able to have conversations about racism with some of my friends for the first time in my entire life. And I had a conversation with one of my Black girlfriends about racism and colorism recently. And I feel like it honestly brought us closer together. It really did, to show those raw parts, and at least for myself. And I don't know if we would have gotten there if this movement hadn't happened and isn't happening all around us. So I encourage you to just choose to be open-minded and educate yourself and learn, because we are different, and different's okay. Different's beautiful. Different is amazing. And I'd be really incredibly bored if we were all the same. So bored. So I think, I just think that, and I hope that you're willing to choose to show compassion before you choose to show judgment next time you're presented with an opportunity to learn about somebody that may be different than you, that might have different values or a different upbringing or what have you. And if you've liked that, I would love to hear your stories. I would love to hear what you have to say, whether you contradict me or whether you agree with me. I'm okay with all of that. So if you want to send me your thoughts on this, I would love to hear it. No matter what, I would love to hear it. My email is info@jeboahmiranda.ca. You can visit my website to get more information about me if you want to. It's jeboahmiranda.ca, and you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter at Jeboah Miranda. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for sitting in my vulnerability. Thank you for sitting in this topic. And I deeply, sincerely encourage you to choose love and not hate. So with that, I want to wish you all an incredible day.